Radio Algeria International, our voice in the world.
This is the English service of Radio Algeria International. It's time for the news.
In today's top stories, the permanent representative of Algeria to the United Nations, Ammar Ben Jammeh, has been elected Vice President of the United Nations Economic and Social Council, an achievement that reflects Algeria's prestigious place on the international scene. Algeria is preparing to assume the presidency of the Peace and Security Council of the African Union in August and will devote its mandate to the promotion of the peace and security agenda of the Pan-African Organization. And in our third top stories, Slovenia has announced a total ban on all arms trade with the Israeli occupation, thus becoming the first country in the European Union to take such a measure in response to the ongoing aggression in Gaza. Hello and welcome to Radio Algeria International. I'm Jamal Samani. The President of the Republic, Abdelmadjid Tebboune, received yesterday in Algiers the foreign ministers of the G4 group, namely Algeria, Nigeria, South Africa and Ethiopia. The President of the Republic also chaired a working session yesterday that brought together all the managers of the sectors concerned by import and export operations. Lebanon's ambassador to Algiers, Mohammed Mahmoud Hassan, has said that the official visit paid by Lebanese President Joseph Aoun to Algeria was fruitful and exceptional, reflecting the depth of the fraternal ties uniting the two countries. In a statement to the press at the end of a meeting with the President of the Republic, to whom he was paying a farewell visit at the end of his mission in Algeria, Mahmoud Hassan said that the official visit made by the Lebanese President to Algeria marked a new beginning for common historical relations.
Today we enjoy excellent relations with our sister country Algeria. At the end of my diplomatic mission, I thank God His Excellency Lebanese President General Joseph Aoun paid a visit. This visit, which was successful by all standards, economically, culturally, politically, socially and medially, was the culmination of the struggle and effort of Lebanese diplomacy and Algerian diplomacy, and it came to embody the brotherly relations that bind Lebanon and Algeria, and these agreements are the beginning of a new start for our historic joint relations.
That was Lebanon's ambassador to Algiers, Mohammed Mahmoud Hassan. The Minister of State in charge of Foreign Affairs, the National Community Abroad and African Affairs, Ahmed Attaf, has received the visiting Minister of International Relations and Cooperation of the Republic of South Africa, Ronald Lamola. The meeting focused on the different aspects of the strategic partnership between Algeria and South Africa and the prospects for its strengthening and development in accordance with the ambitious objectives set by the leaders of the two countries, President Abdelmadjid Tebboune and his brother President Cyril Ramaphosa, during their talks in Algiers last December. In this regard, the two parties agreed to finalize the activation of bilateral cooperation mechanisms, notably through the holding of the first session of the evaluation and monitoring mechanism and the revitalization of the Joint Affairs Council. The Minister of State in charge of Energy, Mines and Renewable Energies, Mohamed Arqab, has received the visiting Foreign Minister of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Yusuf Maitama Tugar. The meeting allowed it to deepen consultation and to exchange views on the prospects for bilateral cooperation between Algeria and Nigeria, notably in the fields of energy and renewable energies. The two parties praised the quality of relations between the two countries and affirmed their common desire to raise them to higher levels of strategic partnership through concrete projects and joint action programs promoting economic integration and sustainable development on the continent, notably the strengthening of cooperation between the companies of the two countries in the field of oil and gas and the exchange of expertise and of experiences in the field. The permanent representative of Algeria to the United Nations, Ammar Benjama, has been elected Vice President of the United Nations Economic and Social Council, an achievement that reflects Algeria's prestigious place on the international scene and its growing role in the concert of nations. The election is a recognition of Algeria's continued commitment to promoting equitable and inclusive sustainable development at regional and international levels. Political analyst Badis Khnissa told Radio Algeria International that this came at a crucial moment.
Une responsabilité stratégique qui consacre notamment la place de l'Algérie en tant que médiateur.
A strategic responsibility that consolidates Algeria's position as a respected mediator and guarantor of stability on the African continent. This presidency comes at a crucial moment with everyone focused on pressing issues, such as Sudan, a conflict that threatens regional cohesion, the fragile situation in South Sudan, where peace is a work in progress, and the decisive fight against terrorism, one of the greatest challenges to collective security in Africa and in the Sahel region in particular.
Au Sahel plus particulièrement.
One of the main organs of the UN Economic and Social Council, plays a central role in monitoring the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, while supporting member states in their efforts to address current economic, social, and environmental challenges. Through this new leadership role, Algeria intends to advocate for a balanced development model guaranteeing economic and social justice based on its national vision, based on the anchoring of the social dimension in economic policies, a vision embodied by the program of the President of the Republic, Abdelmadjid Tebboune, who places sustainable development at the heart of the priorities of national action. Now, the Deputy Speaker of the National People's Assembly, Mounder Bouden, has met in Geneva, Switzerland, with the Speaker of the National People's Assembly of Guinea-Bissau, Domingos Simões Pereira, on the sidelines of the proceedings of the 6th World Conference of Speakers of Parliament. On this occasion, the two parties discussed the historical relations between Algeria and Guinea-Bissau, stressing the need to breathe a new life into them through the strengthening of bilateral exchanges, notably at the parliamentary level, thanks to the political will of the two countries to promote their relations in various fields. In a speech delivered during his participation in Geneva as representative of APN Chairman Brahim Boughali in the proceedings of the 6th World Conference of Speakers of Parliament, Mr. Bouden has called for the launch of a serious process to restore the lost balance in the system of international relations, reiterating Algeria's commitment to defend the legitimate right of the African continent to fair and permanent representation in the United Nations Security Council. He underlined that the absence of this balance is one of the main sources of tensions in international governance due to the marginalization of developing countries, especially African countries. The details with Said Bougazi.
The APN Deputy Speaker reviewed Algeria's approach, which makes development a sine qua non condition for the achievement of security and stability in Africa. He reaffirmed in this context Algeria's commitment to defend the legitimate rights of the continent to fair and permanent representation in the Security Council in accordance with the Sirte Declaration and the Ezulwini Consensus, calling for the unification of African ranks to achieve this objective. In the same context, he recalled Algeria's commitment to dialogue and peaceful solutions for the settlement of crises, as well as to the principle of non-interference in the internal affairs of states, reaffirming the continuation of this commitment through Algeria's contribution to efforts to maintain international peace and security and to strengthen the role of the UN in order to ensure that it fully assumes its responsibilities, particularly towards the Palestinian and Sahrawi peoples.
كما تؤكد حرصها على حمل صوت الدول العربية والإفريقية وضمان الدفاع.
Algeria also reaffirms its commitment to representing the voice of Arab and African countries and ensuring the defense of common strategic interests in various issues falling within the purview of the Security Council, particularly the tragic and inhumane situation in occupied Palestine, and its full commitment to the African approach of making the continent peaceful and steadily and resolutely moving towards fundamental, strong and effective development goals. In developments that shape the future of humanity, Algeria has made the reform of the United Nations Security Council an imperative for achieving a more representative, just and balanced international system. Algeria's commitment to peace, dialogue and peaceful resolution for crises, and its affirmation of the principles of non-interference in the internal affairs of states continue to inspire international action and cooperation and strengthen the United Nations' role in fulfilling its responsibilities, particularly with regard to the Palestinian and Sahrawi peoples.
الشعبين الفلسطيني والصحراوي.
At the end of his speech, Munder Boudin underlined Algeria's attachment to the African approach to building a secure and integrated continent capable of effectively contributing to the definition of the contours of the future of the world, as well as the continuation of its efforts to strengthen multilateral action, expand strategic partnerships, consolidate the principles of non-alignment and the fight against terrorism, and allow women and young people to participate in the efforts in these areas.
As you followed in our top stories, Algeria is preparing to assume the presidency of the Peace and Security Council of the African Union in August and will devote its mandate to the promotion of the peace and security agenda of the Pan-African Organization. During its mandate, Algeria will work together with the other PSC member states to address the continent's current security challenges and promote the AU Peace and Security Council or agenda. The Algerian presidency will be punctuated by important meetings on this situation in Sudan and South Sudan, as well as other thematic sessions on governance and the early warning system in its component relating to the coordination between the African Peer Review Mechanism and the AU Counter-Terrorism Center and the AU Police Cooperation Mechanism. The chairmanship's work program also includes a meeting to review the terms of reference of the subcommittee of the Peace and Security Council on Counter-Terrorism, as well as a coordination meeting with African members of the UN Security Council. The World Health Organization WHO has said that the Gaza Strip, where the Zionist entity is continuing its genocidal aggression since October 2023, is currently facing the worst-case scenario of famine. The alert issued this week by the Integrated Food Security Phase Classification said that people are left without food for several days and others succumb to diseases or organ failure, their bodies being weakened by malnutrition. This was contained in the WHO communique. More in this report.
The WHO stressed that the health system supposed to be a source of relief and survival is in turn in agony, noting that there is a lack of basic medical supplies, fuel and other vital resources. The WHO warned that the humanitarian workers and health workers are themselves weakened by hunger, describing the death by starvation as a slow and painful agony, especially for the children. A hungry child can cry in pain without interruption until he becomes too weak to weep, and the child suffering from hunger will die if not treated immediately as the same source. To put an end to this human hemorrhage and to reverse the course of this man-made tragedy will take months, if not years, because the recovery of a malnourished person requires care by specialized medical services, an adapted therapeutic diet and precise food supplements, warns the WHO. Depending on the organization, the consequences can be irreversible, including growth growth disorders, impaired brain development, and other chronic health complications. It added that IPC partners, including WHO, will continue to work on their assessments, even though the seriousness of the situation is already obvious. In this respect, the WHO insisted on the need to immediately authorize large-scale entry of food, medicines, and all forms of humanitarian aid by all possible means, specifying that the stocks are ready and waiting at the crossing points.
Slovenia has announced a total ban on all arms trade with the Israeli occupation, thus becoming the first country in the European Union to take such a measure in response to the ongoing genocide in Gaza. In a statement published Thursday evening, reported by the press agency WAFA, the Slovenian government confirmed having approved this decision initiated by Prime Minister Robert Golob, aiming to ban the export, import and transit of weapons and military equipment between Slovenia and the Zionist entity. The United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights Volker Turk has called on the international community to hold Zionist officials accountable for their actions. Speaking at the Helsinki Plus 50 conference in the Finnish capital, Volker Turk said that the root causes of the conflict often lie in inequalities and violations of rights and are fueled by dehumanization and discrimination. He said that these dynamics are visible today in Gaza, stressing that the Israeli occupation must end its illegal presence and all violations of human rights and international humanitarian law in the occupied Palestinian territories.
But I also want to mention the occupied Palestinian territory, where our reporting has kept a spotlight on the huge number of civilians, deaths in the Israeli bombardments of Gaza, the repeated forced displacement, the unlawful restrictions imposed on the entry and distribution of humanitarian aid, the killings of people seeking food, and attacks and harassments of Palestinians by Israeli settlers and security forces in the occupied West Bank. It is clear that that war must also end. The hostages must be released, Israel must end its unlawful presence, and there must be accountability for all violations of international human rights and international humanitarian law.
That was the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Volker Turk. The Al-Quds Institute for Applied Research in Palestine has said that the aggressions committed by Jewish settlers against Palestinians between January and June 2025 reached a total of 1,444 attacks, affirming that the primary objective of these aggressions is to push the Palestinians to leave their lands. More details on the issue with Said Bouazi.
In a report published yesterday and relayed by the WAFA news agency, the Institute indicated that the number of aggressions committed by Jewish settlers in the occupied West Bank has experienced an unprecedented escalation, specifying that the price paid by the Palestinians cannot be measured only by the number of attacks, but by the daily suffering that affects all aspects of life: difficulties in accessing water sources and agricultural land, traffic restrictions, closure of village entrances and roads by settlers, as well as various forms of psychological and physical violence inflicted on the inhabitants. The report stresses that the Palestinian is now besieged not only through the separation wall, but also through a network of violence that began with the settlers and continued through unjust military laws. It said that these attacks are neither isolated or accidental incidents, but they are indeed a policy of systematic violence aimed at displacing the Palestinian people from their land and emptying the areas of their Palestinian inhabitants with a view to expanding illegal settlements and outposts and appropriating the land for various purposes related to colonization. In conclusion, the report notes that the aggressions committed by the settlers constitute serious violations of international humanitarian law and international human rights law.
Russia launched more drones against Ukraine in July, more than in any other month since the start of the conflict, according to an AFP analysis published on Friday, which shows an intensification of the bombings despite Donald Trump's ultimatums. At the Security Council, Algeria expressed deep concern about the multipolarization that further complicates the conflict, hinders the establishment of peace and obstructs mediation efforts. Let's listen to an excerpt from the statement by Algiers Deputy Permanent Representative to the UN, Toufiq El Koudri, who called on behalf of Algeria for dialogue and resolve the conflict.
تجدد بلادي دعوتها للطرفين لاختيار طريق الحوار بدلا من المواجهة.
My country repeats its call to both parties to choose the path of dialogue over confrontation and understanding over escalation, and to avoid the logic of international polarization, particularly in light of signs of direct negotiations between both sides. We also call on the international community to double its efforts to create the right conditions to facilitate direct negotiations and to reach conversions and enable the achieving of consensus in visions to reduce escalation and conflict between the two parties. In closing, my country reiterates a strong commitment to support all diplomatic efforts aimed at reaching a ceasefire and achieving a just, sustained and comprehensive peace based on the purposes and principles of the United Nations Charter, taking into account the security concerns, the legitimate security concerns of both parties.
That was Algiers Deputy Permanent Representative to the UN, Toufiq El Koudri. Stay tuned to Radio Algeria International.
Welcome to our special program, Inspiring Figures. Today's program is dedicated to the life, teachings and legacy of the esteemed Jalaluddin Rumi. Jalaluddin Rumi was one of the great spiritual masters and poetic geniuses of mankind, and the Mevlevi Sufi order was founded to follow his teachings. He was born in 1207 in Balkh in present-day Afghanistan to a family of learned theologians. Escaping the Mughal invasion, he and his family traveled extensively in Muslim lands, performed pilgrimage to Mecca and visited Medina. The journey brought the family to Erzincan and then Qom Rahman, where Rumi studied for a short period in the Halabi school. In 1228, at the invitation of the Sultan of Seljuk, Alaeddin Keykubat, they settled in Konya, Anatolia in present-day Turkey, then part of Seljuk Empire. Jalaluddin married and lived with his wife, Gevher Hatun, who bore him 2 children. He is called Rumi, meaning Anatolian, because of his life in that place. He also gained the title Mevlana, which means our master, through his life's work there. Rumi's tomb is in Konya, Turkey. When his father Bahauddin Veld passed away in 1231, Rumi succeeded him as a professor in religious sciences at the largest theological school in Konya. Only 24 years old, Rumi was already an accomplished scholar in religious and positive sciences. He died on the 17th of December 1273 in Konya, where he had spent most of his adult life and composed all his works, and where his tomb lies today. Although Rumi had already succeeded to his father's position as a teacher, when the great scholar and Sufi Burhanuddin al-Tirmidhi arrived in Konya, Rumi studied under him and devoted himself to his service for 9 years. This training was focused on divine love, worship, austerity and abstinence, piety, consciousness of God, humility and tolerance, which are the foundation of Sufism. Rumi spent his days mostly praying and serving people who came to visit the Sufi center, preparing food for them, collecting wood for cooking and heating, and cleaning the toilets and bathroom used by visitors. He thus learned the merit of serving people and knew what serving people is ultimately serving God. On Burhanuddin's advice, Rumi completed his scholarly education in Aleppo, mastering also the classical Islamic sciences, including jurisprudence fiqh, commentary on the Quran tafsir, tradition hadith, and epistemology usul. There was thus a number of significant figures in Rumi's spiritual development. Apart from his father and Burhanuddin, he made many great philosophers and scholars of the age, including the renowned Ibn Arabi in Aleppo and Damascus, and others in Konya under the patronage of the Seljuk court. He thus acquired both the inner and outer sciences within 16 years. The most famous and probably the most fruitful relationship in his development was with Shams Tabriz, who he met in Konya at the suggestion of Ruknuddin Zarqubi. Modern historians may argue about who influenced whom in their long association, but this is not profitable. What we know is that for a particular period of time, two skillful and acute spirits came together, and by sharing the divine bounties and gifts they received from their Lord, they reached peaks that most would not be able to reach easily on their own. To this day, the place where the two first met in Konya is known as Mark's El Bahrain, the meeting point of the two oceans. Through their spiritual cooperation, they enlightened those of their own age and have also influenced all the centuries which followed. Following the departures of Shams, Rumi continued to compose his works and to develop the principle that would be followed by the older form and named in his honor after his death. He started to live in seclusion and abstinence, practicing ascetics in series of 3 periods of 40 days. Eating a little, talking a little, and sleeping a little were essential components of this discipline. Here it is important to remember that while Rumi was informed by numerous sources of ideas on his journey, he seemed to leave many of his contemporaries behind. His love and compassion flowed like the waters of the world's oceans. So much so that while continuing to live physically among humans, he managed to become ever closer to God. He never elevated himself above others, but his writings, both during his life and after his entering into eternal life, provide a guiding star which reflects the light of the spiritual life of the Prophet of Islam. Thus he is among the few figures who have exerted great influence over large parts of history and large regions of the world. Rumi's poetry and prose writing have a spiritual content that is the universal language of the human soul. They speak of the spiritual journey of man's ascent through the mind and love to perfection. His works were recorded, collected and compiled during his lifetime and after his death by his son, his friends and his students, particularly his much-loved disciple Husamuddin Chelebi. He passed away in 1273. Muslims, Christians, Arabs, Persians, Turks and Romans honored him at his funeral, and men of faith followed his bier. That night was named Shebul Arus, the night of the union with the divine. Ever since, the Mevlevi dervishes have kept that date as a festival. Although Rumi was known and loved during his lifetime by the Christians in his immediate environment, the West only came to know him many centuries later, in part because the great German poet Goethe, one of the fathers of the hugely romantic movement, came to know and be influenced by some of the works of Rumi through the translations of the Austrian historian Joseph von Hammer. Even though most Islamic scholars would argue that von Hammer's translations were for the most part inadequate, nevertheless the power and beauty of Rumi's thought, mysticism and love shone through. By this route, Rumi has long been a strong, albeit indirect, influence on religious, cultural and even political life in Europe and the United States, and provides a real point of unity for East and West. The current truth and great potential of this cultural meeting is best proved by the fact that Rumi has been the best-selling poet in the United States for the last 13 years. Rumi's life and works show us that it is not faith, belief and religion which cause hatred, conflict and violence, but the sins of hatred and greed and other symptoms of